Okay, next up we've got this text input field. And a text input is actually going to be pretty easy to implement, but we're going to have a lot of stories to go along with it to really explain how to use it. So same process as before, I'll go to my text editor and we'll go ahead and start knocking this all out. So first off, we're going to create a new component called TextInput.js. In our form index, we'll go ahead, copy this, call this text input, and we'll export that. Inside of our text input, we'll just go ahead and export that same null that we've been exporting before. With that complete, we can actually go ahead and start writing our story here now. So we'll import the text input first. And then I'm going to say stories of, we're going to use that same nesting technique. So we'll say stories of form/text input. We'll add our decorator, and then we can start adding things. So we'll have our default case once again, which will render out a text input. And something we want to do with the text input is anything that isn't basically a field wrapper prop, so anything that isn't a label, message, or message type, we just want to go ahead and forward that onto the normal text input without having to implement that ourselves, because text inputs are changing. There's a lot of props with it, so we don't want to have to manually define all of that. And even in our story, I don't want to define all of that, and you don't want me to type all that. So what I'm going to do is actually create a new variable up here called const default text input props. And that's just going to be an object. We're going to pass it a label of demo. And then the onChange text. And onChange text is just going to be that prop that text input exposes, the one from React Native, so that we can actually use it. So all I'll do here is say action, and then I'll pass onChange text so we can actually see text being input into that field. Okay, so the way we can actually go ahead and pass this on is by using the object spread. So ... default text input props, can save that. And then if we go to our stories, we can now see we've got this text input default showing up. Excellent. So what other things do we do? Well, like I said, I want to make sure that we pass along all of the props to it. So we're going to say with placeholder. Placeholder is going to be a prop that is exposed by the default text input. So we can go ahead and grab this same thing. And this time what I'll add is placeholder is going to equal to demo placeholder. Likewise, I want to make sure that we're passing the value down. These are kind of almost more like test cases, or you could also look at them as kind of documentation for future ones, like how exactly do I work with this without having to look at the implementation of it. I can see that props are just going to be forwarded down to the native text input component. So we can also add with an error message. This one's just checking that, or demonstrating that we are using this field wrapper setup. So we can set a message. This is an error. We'll also set a message type, which is equal to error. And then I want to add two more cases or demos, and then we'll actually go to implementing this, which promise it won't take long. We're going to check if it's basically do an email version and a password version as well, just so we can see how that works. So we can pass a label. We'll call this one email now. We're going to give it a value of spencer@reactnativeschool.com. And then we'll give a keyboard type equal to email address. Again, keyboard type and value, those are props that the native React Native component exposes. So it's another test to make sure it's still doing that. Down here for password, we can say label is equal to password. We'll give it a value equal to password. And then we also want to make sure we're using the secure text entry. Okay, so you can see here we've got a lot of props. We've got placeholder, value, keyboard type, secure text entry, and then we've got all of our props. We want to make sure those are all forwarded along automatically without us having to do any extra work. So let's do the normal import of React, text input, style sheet, and view. we'll go ahead and create our styles, which is stylesheet.create. We can export default our component, and we know that we're going to be grabbing the label, the message, and the message type. Right? Those are all the props we care about. And then something cool we can do is actually say ... rest or whatever, and that'll pull all of the extra props or all of the extra variables that are being passed to this component onto this rest object so that we can go ahead and forward those along. And before we can actually continue along, something else we need to do is import the field wrapper component from ./field wrapper. And then let's actually start doing this stuff. So we've got our field wrapper. We know our field wrapper is going to take the label. That's going to equal label. We got our message. That's equal to message. Message type is equal to message type. Okay, and then we can go ahead, take a text input, and we can go ahead and pass all the rest of the variables down to it. So we've got that showing up, but it's kind of hard to actually find our text input. That's kind of just something that's notorious with text inputs in React Native. So let's go ahead and add some styling to it. So I'll say style is equal to styles.textInput. And then we're actually going to create a border down at the bottom as well to make it easier to find. So we'll say style is equal to styles.border. And then we can actually go ahead and start knocking these out. So we've got a text input and we've got a border. The border is the easier one, so we'll start there. It's got a height of 1, and it's going to have a background color of colors.border. Text input is going to be a font size of 14, font weight of 500, and then we'll also give it a padding bottom of 10. Okay, cool. So we're actually seeing things now. You can see our text input. We can type into it. If we go back to to localhost, you can actually see the values are being outputted as we type in here. So we can see our on-change text is successfully being forwarded along to our text input, so we can actually enter and capture that input that the user is giving us. So we can actually go through, we can check with placeholder, with a value, with an error message. We can see our email. So we're actually seeing an error here because I mistyped email address. We'll go back to our form.stories, change our keyboard type to email address. You can see this, and if I actually press Command D, basically this is going to change the keyboard that's being shown to our user. Then password, we can actually see it's not displaying the text, which is perfect. So here, most of our work was really just because we built this component library kind of from the ground up. The actual implementation of our text input was really, really easy. We just use this field wrapper and we pass out a text input and a border. So you can kind of see here, this component library is basically giving us these building blocks to really just build on top of in a really, really simple to use way. And then by using Storybook, it's giving us a way to test things in isolation, in addition to documenting our components, in addition to giving them a way to actually test them and demonstrate everything. So that is another component in the books. Let's knock out the next one and be done with this thing, shall we?